Good morning and welcome to the January meeting of the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Alan Lamb. I represent the Wetherby Ward and I chair this board. So we're going to go around and introduce ourselves initially. We've got a very busy agenda this morning, as we usually do. So with no further ado, I will start the introductions. I'd particularly like to welcome this morning, I'll go out of the usual alphabetical order and welcome Callum Dixon to his first meeting, who's taken over from Emma Holmes as a representative of Young Lives Leeds. So, Callum, would you like to introduce yourself first, please, and then I'll go around the rest of the board.
Yeah, morning everyone. My name is Callum Dixon. I'm the Deputy Chair of Young Lives Leeds and Head of Operations for Gipsall.
Brilliant. Well, you're very welcome to the meeting and thank you for joining the board. We really look forward to your contributions, Callum. So if I can ask everyone else in alphabetical order then to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Councillor Bithell, please.
Hi there, Councillor Hannah Bithell, representing Kirkstall.
And then Kate Blacker, please.
Morning, I'm the co-opted member for primary schools, parent governor representative.
Thank you. Councillor Drinkwater.
Yeah, Councillor for Drinkwater for Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn, please.
Good morning. Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adler Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Celia Foot, please.
Good morning, Celia Foot. I'm a teacher representative. Thank you.
Councillor Forsyth.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Councillor Gruen, please.
Morning, Councillor Caroline Gruen, and I represent Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Thank you. And I will not forget Councillor Howley this morning.
Thank you, Chair. Chris Howley, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Thank you. Is Councillor Hussain with us or are we still waiting for him?
Chair, we've just been notified that Councillor Hussain will be joining us just a bit later.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Councillor Illingworth, please.
John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Lennox, please.
Good morning, Councillor Jess Lennox from Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall Cattung, please.
Good morning, Abigail Marshall Cattung representing Little London, Woodhouse and the City Centre.
Thank you. Debbie Riley, please.
Good morning, Debbie Riley. I'm co-opted member for Children Looked After and Care Leavers.
Thank you. Councillor Renshaw, please.
Good morning, Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Ardsley and Robin Hood Ward.
And Councillor Stevenson.
Morning, Ryan Stevenson, representing the Harewood Ward.
Thank you. And then finally, Jackie Ward, please.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Ward and I'm a co-opted member and I'm parent governor representative for secondary.
Thank you. And then finally, can I ask our two support officers to introduce themselves, starting with Angela, please.
Good morning, I'm Angela Brogden, the Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Thank you. And Harriet, please.
Good morning, Harriet Space, I'm Governance Officer.
Thank you. And good morning and welcome, everybody. We do have a busy agenda to get through today, as we said. What I'm proposing to do is I've allocated about 45 to 50 minutes for each section of the meeting, but I'm going to propose, with the agreement of the officers, that we merge the financial health monitoring and the budget proposals into one item. So we can discuss that and we'll have 45 to 50 minutes on that item. So I've asked that the introductions to each section are kept to no more than 5 minutes. And then if I could encourage people, I certainly don't want to stifle debate, so I still like to see lots of hands going up. But if we can keep the questions and comments to the point, and also if the responses from officers can be concise as well. And if we try and just keep it to one person responding to each question, and if there's extra time at the end of each section, then obviously we can take more points then. But I think there's a lot to get through today. If we get straight into the agenda, item 1, are there any appeals, please?
No appeals, Chair.
Thank you. Any items that we need to exclude the public from?
There are no exempt items today, Chair.
Thank you. Any late items?
No late items.
Thank you. And item 4, do any members have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No, lots of head shaking. That's good. Item 5, if we could just run through the apologies and any substitutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we've received apologies today from Councillor Kidger and co-opted members Tony Brisson, Andrew Graham and Helen Bellamy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So item 6 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 25th of November 2020, which seems a lifetime ago now. So first of all, can we just approve those minutes from members that were present? Everybody happy? Yeah, lots of nodding, thank you. And then are there any matters arising from those minutes which members would like to raise, which we're not covering elsewhere on the agenda? No, not seeing anything. So then we move into the main items of the agenda. The first item that we're looking at, item 7, is the performance update. So if I could just ask the executive members and the officers to introduce themselves first. So if we start with Councillor Pryor, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Pryor. I'm the executive member for Learning Skills and Employment.
Thank you. Do we have Councillor Venner, please?
Yes, I'm here, Chair. I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children and Families.
Excellent, thank you. Sal Tariq, please.
Morning, everyone. Salim Tariq. I'm Director of Children and Families.
Okay, thank you. Julie Longworth, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Longworth and I'm Deputy Director for Children and Families.
Thank you. Tim Pouncey, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's Tim Pouncey, Chief Officer of Resources and Strategy within Children and Families.
Thank you. Val Waite, please.
Good morning, everybody. Val Waite, Head of Learning Inclusion.
Thank you. Dave Clark, please.
Morning, everybody. I'm Dave Clark. I'm the Head of Learning Improvement with Children and Families.
And do we have Chris Hudson?
Yes, good morning. I'm Chris Hudson, a Performance Programme Manager from Children and Families.
Thank you. And are there any other officers on the call that I've missed that wanted to introduce themselves, or is that everybody?
Councillor Lamb, Louise Hornsey is trying to get into the meeting. She'll be with us shortly, I understand.
Okay.
Apologies, I've just got in. I'm here now.
Oh, good morning, Louise. Good to have you with us.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so if I hand over initially for the performance report to Councillors Pryor and Venner for any comments they want to make, and then presumably an introduction from Sal, and then we can get straight into questions and comments from there. So who'd like to go first, Councillor Pryor or Councillor Venner?
I'm happy.
Chair, I'm not going to make any introductory comments on this to save time. I'll make some comments on the finance reports, but not this one, although obviously happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. So, Councillor Pryor, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see me at all? My camera doesn't seem to be working this end. You may just have to deal with my voice. Never mind. Yeah, I thought it'd be useful to kind of give a bit of an overview over the past, I guess, few days, few hours and days. It's been quite a difficult and quite a busy time for schools. Obviously, kind of over the Christmas break, what will be the big issue kind of coming back was testing in schools. It turns out that kind of wasn't the biggest issue. Over the weekend, obviously the NEU and other unions were coming together to take the position that they didn't want their members going into schools. I joined, there was a massive Zoom call with the NEU, which I've viewed, and they were recommending that their members issue their Section 44 letters, which would mean they would still be working, but just not working on school premises. We spoke to a few head teachers and kind of amongst ourselves, obviously. The rates in Leeds at that time weren't as high as the rest of the country, and indeed hadn't even been as high as Leeds had been previously when schools had been open. So I think at that stage, while we completely empathised with the union position, and actually it was one that made total sense when you looked at some of the rates in London, which were kind of 3-4 times what Leeds was at the time, we took the position to speak to our schools, to kind of recommend that they prepare for online learning, they prepare for schools to be closed, and also that if any staff did issue their Section 44 letter, to not take any action against those staff. Obviously on Monday night, things changed quite significantly with the Prime Minister putting the country into a full lockdown. I think that there has been a lot of frustration about this in schools. You know, this kind of new strain of the virus that spreads much faster has been known for some time. You know, at the start of the Christmas break, I think it would have been better had schools known where they were going with this, and indeed kind of there was no difference in the information the government had from when the Prime Minister said schools were perfectly safe to go back to, and then when he called them was it vectors of transmission, whatever it is, literally kind of a day later. So there has been a lot of frustration from schools in how a lot of government policy seems to be made kind of on the hoof. But I think our schools have risen to that challenge, I think we'll call it, and a lot of schools have moved to online learning. At the moment, I think some of the issues are the sheer numbers of children coming in as children of key workers. In the first lockdown, these numbers were very small, and you know, staff could be worked on a rota basis. This time, I think there's kind of an issue which links into kind of the employment side of my portfolio, which, while doesn't kind of this scrutiny board doesn't cover it, obviously it's relevant, where in the first lockdown a huge number of workers were on furlough and therefore kind of kept their children at home, whereas now a lot of businesses have kind of started to get people back to work. They're reluctant to put people back on furlough. Some of the messages from the government about whether you should be going into work or not are open to interpretation. Some of them, because it's work at home if you can, a lot of businesses are still making people go into work, which means that more children are being pushed into schools. So this isn't the same level of lockdown as we had in March, with a lot more children going into school. So those are kind of the key issues. It's also worth mentioning that the Prime Minister has also announced that exams aren't to be taking place. And I think kind of the position that you took as a scrutiny board, kind of in the joint letter with us, kind of raising those concerns, were absolutely right. I think it was right that we were raising those concerns, and it was clear that kind of those exams, well, it was clear to us that those exams could have never taken place back in kind of October, November, whenever it was we sent the letter. But I am pleased that the government has now come round to that position. I'll leave it there for now. For the past few days, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions on this, and I'll pass over to Sal at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pryor. Yeah, I would just add to that that position that there are a number of schools where there is quite a bit of pressure around the key worker cohort. So you'll remember in the first lockdown that actually demand wasn't as high as we had anticipated from key worker and vulnerable children, but this time round there is significantly higher demand, and so we are working closely with the schools to try and manage how they respond both to those numbers coming into school and providing a remote learning offer at the same time. There are people will be aware that the early years settings are to remain open, and this is providing some challenges to them, because if parents have a number of children who are school age and eligible for childcare, if the children from school are staying at home and they're trying to support them with remote learning, they may also choose to keep their younger children at home, which reduces demand for places in early years settings. In spring and summer term last year, early year settings were funded based on the number of children that they had on their books. Currently they're funded by the number of children that actually attend, and so that does create some issues for them in terms of financial sustainability. And there are also your after school clubs that schools are having to consider in light of all of the other considerations that they're making in terms of keeping their schools going for key worker and vulnerable children. And just very quickly on free school meals, we're working really closely with the schools to ensure that those that do come into school who are eligible free school meals receive their free school meals as usual, and that provision is made for those children and young people that aren't attending physically attending school at this moment in time. Just onto the performance report, I'm happy for us to move on to that in terms of talking you through it with Chris. What we've tried to do with this report is bring together the usual information that we provide to Scrutiny Board. Clearly, we monitor this performance information on a regular basis within the service, and some of those factors will have been affected by COVID, but I'm pleased to report that overall our performance, as you'll see from the reports, has continued to remain relatively stable compared to previous years. Do you want me to hand over to Chris to go through the report, or do you want to move to questions, Councillor Lamb?
Well, there's a couple of specific hands that have gone up on the things that have been raised so far. So if I take those, and then if we go on to the specifics of the performance report. So I've got Councillor Illingworth first, please.
Well, it is actually a more general question, Chair, but never mind. I can raise it now and wait for an answer if necessary. It's not necessary. It's don't want to break the flow of this debate. I'm concerned about the provision of digital devices to children, and particularly people who have low incomes who can't afford to buy them and need to use the free versions, and also lack of experience among parents in using them. It cuts both ways, does this? That not only do poor families, generally speaking, have fewer or zero suitable devices, but they don't have the experience to use them, and both are heavily weighted against the success of children. I'm just wondering if we could be doing more in this area, and I'd like to have a discussion about it, not necessarily straight away.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. This is Sal. If I direct all of the responses to you, and then you farm it out to who you think's best placed to answer.
Sure thing. So, I mean, I'll just say generally on this that the allocation through schools for digital devices and access to the internet has been increased by government. We've communicated all of that through to the schools through My Bulletin, so they are able to get access to those materials. But I agree that it is very challenging for some families, both in terms of, you know, where people don't have access, they're not practiced at using either the equipment that we've got or how some of the online stuff works. There is some consideration being given at the moment, I understand, to whether those with particular difficulties in this area might be able to come into school for learning, and I think you know, that's helpful in some ways, I guess, given the pressures that we've talked about already in terms of the numbers of key workers. Adding to that number will make that a bit more of a challenge for some schools, but we can work through some of the individual issues with those schools. And also, I think schools are taking this into account, and I think not all remote learning is online. So schools do provide packs of paper-based work for children and young people to be undertaking and completing as well. If you want more detail, I mean, I can go to Dave on that, but I think overall that's the position as we see it at the minute.
Can I just come back very briefly?
Go ahead.
Just, yes. Do you think there's a role for what I might describe as mystery shopping in this area? We try and get some objective data on how things are going. I suspect that maybe, well, we all suspect the deprivation may be more serious than we realise, and to document that might be helpful in the longer term, as well as starting a response.
Dave? I think you're on mute, Dave, or we can't hear you.
Sorry, sorry, Councillor. Yeah, the DfE have just put up some further guidance in terms of access to digital devices for the most, and starting with the rollout for the most vulnerable children. And schools, the allocation that was originally given to schools that was then cut has now gone back up again. So we're still waiting to find out how many devices are going out there. There's also just as well a few. We're focusing on, there's some social enterprise work going on, and I know there's councillors on this call trying to do some work around very specific vulnerable groups, particularly those children in years 11 and 13, to try and find ways of increasing the numbers of digital devices.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so next I've got Councillor Forsyth, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two specific questions and then just generally a comment. First of all, is there any guidance about the maximum class sizes now? As has been pointed out, there's obviously many more children in school now because the parents are key workers. So guidance, schools will need guidance about whether there's any maximum size, considering now, of course, that they finally accepted that, in fact, transmission of coronavirus does go on in schools. That's the first question. The second question is about the free school meals provision for the pupils who are not actually in school. Is that likely to be through hampers or through vouchers? And what learning has been has come about from the way it was delivered before previously? And finally, just a comment about the staff in schools who are now going to be expected to prepare lessons for the pupils in school as well as online learning. I shouldn't think there can be an answer to that at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Sal.
Yeah, so Councillor Forsyth, on your last point there, I think that is one of the major issues that we are trying to work closely with individual schools on, because that is presenting a significant challenge. I've checked with other areas, both in the region and nationally, and that is it's a national problem that people are dealing with in terms of the numbers. So we've got further conversations in with Department for Education. We're planning to try and speak to them today, just to clarify some of the guidance and whether there are ways for certain schools to be able to try and manage those numbers so that they can provide a quality remote offer, as well as ensuring that they're providing an offer for key worker and vulnerable children. There isn't, again, one of the other conversations that we are having with them is about maximum sizes, class sizes, because again, given the numbers that we've just described, and particularly I think in smaller schools, you know, this issue around class sizes becomes quite a pressure. The guidance from the number that the NEU are talking about is about 8 children per class, but as I say, we're going to speak later today to Department for Education and try and get some clarification about that. And on the free school meals, I think we are, for those that are not attending school, we are hoping to provide hampers, because that seemed to be the methodology that worked best through from catering Leeds. I don't know, Dave, if there's anything you want to add, Dave, to any of that.
Yeah, just in terms of the free school meals, we spoke with the free school meals team yesterday. This week, they've sort of gone straight into action. They're going to be providing grab bags on a daily basis just this week whilst they get set up, because they've also got to make sure they get their staff available and supplies, etc. From next week, they'll go to a weekly hamper service, which they've got set up, and then they're hoping at the moment, and things are in place, that they've got adequate staff at the moment for kids who are in school they'll be provided with a hot meal service as normal, as far as possible, and that will continue until, you know, if there's a staffing issue where they can't be doing that, or they need to go to a more sort of grab bag type style like they did before in schools. But at the moment, the plan for catering Leeds is for those that hot meal service. In terms of vouchers, it may be that some form of voucher scheme comes back into operation, as happened before, but we still are waiting further guidance on that from the DfE. Yeah, and just on the maximum class size, just to follow up on what Sal said, it is an issue at the moment. Previously, in the last lockdowns, there was like a 15 number for bubbles. We don't have that clarity at the moment, so that's causing some, with an increase in requests for places at school, it's causing considerable challenges in schools at the moment, and like Sal said, we're speaking with the DfE later today again to try and get some clarity. Councillor Forsyth.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Councillor Gruen, please.
Thank you, Chair. 3 points or questions from me. Just thinking about children looked after and their schooling, I wondered if we knew what proportion of children looked after attended school as vulnerable pupils during the lockdown, and what their attendance was like in that time, and whether that is something that we should be on top of. The second question I have is based on the fact that I represent an area with 2 children's homes in it, and we have had some issues that we've needed to get to grips with. So has antisocial behaviour risen over lockdown within children looked after? And with specific reference to the homes, I'm just wondering, have there been particular provisions put in place over lockdown to keep those looked after young people busy and motivated during that period? And the third point I wanted to raise, I have raised on previous occasions, and it's about the online learning, John. And it's around, now that we're going on for considerably longer, should we now be monitoring this systematically to and understand not just engagement levels and participation levels, but actually how effective that online learning is? I may have mentioned this last time, but I did observe an online lesson for a Year 3 collapsed bubble. And it was very, very, in my view, it was extremely expertly carried out and very effective. And for Councillor Illingworth's information, there was a lesson online with all the children with their computers to explain how Zoom works and how to control what's going on. And the grasp they had of that was just unbelievable. They didn't have any of this nonsense that we have when they're coming into a meeting. They were straight into it and straight on with it. And it was just a joy to be there. So I feel that as it's going to be almost a year that our children in schools have been having online learning, we really do need an insight into how effective that has been. In the brief intervening period between lockdown 1 and lockdown 2, when we were allowed to go into schools for the purpose of work, I did go in for a meeting and we did look at some tests that they carried out during that period in school. And it was clear that there had been a decline in performance over that period, as one might expect. So I just feel that whole agenda needs to be picked up and we need to run with it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay,
thank you.
Go to that point first on the online learning with Dave, and then if we could go over to Julie for the questions on the children looked after, and maybe Chris, if there's any detailed data that we've got.
Yeah, hi, Councillor Gruen. I think it's a significant challenge, and you're right in terms of that it's a significant period of time where children are learning via online methods, and the picture is different in terms of schools and where they're set up and the amount of, you know, how they're geared up for things. The school leaders at the moment, understandably, are very much focused on that sort of organisation, but I think as soon as that's happened, the ultimate role for monitoring of what's taking place for learning is with the school leaders in schools and governors monitoring how that's taking place. In terms, and I think that it's right that happens, that you know, they find out how things are going in terms of how children are learning. Our role, we've set up, I think I mentioned before, we've set up a remote learning group where initially was to support schools in terms of how they would do that. I think what we could, what we'll be moving to is to try and support, good practice and how we can share that around and how we can support them. We can do that through some of our bronze group meetings as well with schools. Ofsted are considering at the moment how they would monitor as well, the online learning aspects, because people, and there's also at the moment there's the DfE have put out further expectations about what they expect to see as part of remote learning, either online or paper based. So there's greater expectations around the quality. It's hard to monitor that, but I think that there will be that move towards that, and we need to keep our eye on that. Yeah.
Okay, was Julia going to come in next?
Yep. Hi. I think what is evident is that I think young people, adolescents in particular, have struggled throughout the pandemic. And I think not least in terms of, the national restrictions during lockdown. Having said that, I don't think that some of the challenges that we have seen in some of our residential establishments, there's been a direct correlation to the pandemic. Whilst it has had an impact, that's clear. I think actually it's much more to do with the individual needs of the individual young people in those settings. And as you would expect, that's where the team around those young people have been working to ensure that the care plan and the approaches that are in place are being effective in meeting those young people's needs. Absolutely, because we have been very mindful of the impact on young people, especially with lockdown and restrictions, we have had a lot of additional input, in particular into the children's homes. So if I give an example of where we have had our residential staff, our youth work staff, who've actually been able to support those young people in going to COVID secure environments such as Herd Farm. So, position where we can take young people out where they can experience positive activities, but within a COVID secure setting. So there's been a range of additional measures that have been put in place, like that, to ensure that we are engaging our young people positively. Also the messaging, so around, again, our youth service have been working with adolescents in the community who've not been adhering to restrictions, especially in the initial lockdown period, to get some of that messaging across. And that's something that we're constantly focusing on within our residential settings. I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave it there for now, but happy to answer other questions. Chris may well want to come in with data.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Chris, did you want to come in at this point?
Yes, just very quickly, thank you. We don't have any data to hand. I would need to check with the head teacher for virtual schools to check whether attendance officers rang round schools to check on children with an open social work case. We might have slightly wider data. So I'd have to ask the specific question and provide an answer outside this meeting to that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Can I just double check? Celia, your hand was up for a while and went down. Has your question been asked and answered?
Yes, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, in which case we're moving on to Debbie next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to raise a question around the in the performance report at paragraph 3.5, it talks about there having been 17% fewer children entering care between April and September. And obviously I recognise that there is priority given to children with who open social work cases, but that figure would suggest that there may be children who are living in circumstances that, COVID notwithstanding, we would have brought into care. I just wonder if we've got a sense of who those children are and if there's any really targeted support that's been given to those families and targeted support that's been given to the workers who are clearly holding additional risk above and beyond that which they would normally have to contend with.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Sal, is that one for you, or?
I can start with that. Yeah. I mean, I would say that actually part of that figure is to do with the overall strategy that we've got in terms of reducing the number of children that need to come into care. And we've recently had some evaluation done of some of our restorative early support teams, which are a new resource that we brought into our most deprived neighbourhoods, actually. And what that evaluation showed was that with the approach that we were taking using the Leeds practice model and a more restorative approach to early help and support, it was significantly impacting and I mean in those areas where the demand, where you would expect the demand to be highest, it was positively impacting on reducing the need. So I don't think that what we're doing is that reduction is not to do with leaving children in riskier circumstances. It's actually to do with the strategy impacting on those circumstances, because that resource is new. It was central government funded in terms of our innovations plan and independently evaluated, and that's showing a reduction in the number of children who are coming into care. The numbers overall, you'll see in the report in terms of children looked after numbers are a little bit up and down over the last 2 or 3 years. They're slightly up, and that has been to do with really the reduction in the number of children leaving care. That's where we have seen an impact, both in terms of a bit of a slowdown in court processes around discharge and variation, and in being able to really push on some of the rehabilitation plans that we had for children and young people. So the increases, otherwise we would have seen, I think, a decrease in the numbers overall, but that number stayed relatively steady with some small decreases overall. I don't know if Julie wants to add anything, but I would just say that it's not about us taking an approach here that says we're going to live with more risk.
I would just reiterate what you've said, Sal, in as much as for me, this is really evidence of the strategy being effective. Sal talked about the restorative early support teams, the rollout of rethink formulation across the system, across the partnership, and that whole system approach. We've got our early help hubs now, which are in place, our parenting programs, so there's a whole host of so our future services, which works with young parents who have had a previous child removed, because we know that they're much more likely to go on to have other children who may well be removed. So there's a whole host of early help, preventative, intensive family support services, which are being delivered, which, alongside effective social work and early help, and that multi-agency practice is ensuring that, we're not bringing children into care unnecessarily, and that actually what we are doing is enabling children to remain with their family where it's safe and appropriate for that to be the case. But, and that's the fundamental point, that we are ensuring that children are safe, and that, it is appropriate for them to remain with family and with support to enable that to be the case. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So I've got Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Renshaw with their hands up, and then I'm going to ask Chris just to go through the data in the performance report, and then see if there's any more specific questions about that. So, Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thanks, Chair. A comment and a question. I think, as been alluded to, we all know that for every day a child's out of school, it's damaging to their education. Remote learning is not as good as in-person learning, and to that extent, I think a certain amount of credit has to be given to those in decision-making roles who were obviously reluctant to close schools. And I think, given the fact that up to Sunday night, Monday morning, it was the cross-party position of both the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister to keep schools open, I think that probably reflects that. A question is on laptops and devices. I'm aware that within some schools, all schools have devices that are used in school. Even with key worker children and vulnerable children in, there will be devices left unused in schools. Some schools are reluctant to, or refusing to hand those devices out to pupils at home because their insurance doesn't cover the device out of school. So these devices will be left gathering dust on the shelves, presumably. So is the council aware of this, and what is the council doing to try and overcome these?
Dave, do you want to pick that up? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm not particularly aware of that as an issue. That's not come to me in terms of the numbers of laptops. Are you meaning by sort of like the school's own devices, not the new ones that have been coming in?
Yeah, so ordinarily, go back 2 years or whatever, schools were using devices in classrooms, laptops or iPads and stuff, to help kids in the classroom. So the kids are in the classroom, but the laptops remain, and the schools are reluctant to send them home because the insurance they have doesn't cover that device outside of the school.
Right. Okay. It's something that I don't have an answer or a thing, but I can certainly make some inquiries into that and see sort of how widespread that is, and if there's anything we can do to support that in terms of getting more devices to kids. Is that?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Renshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask what support is being given to childminders, because obviously during the lockdown, in the first lockdown, they didn't seem to have many children attending because the parents were at home. But this third time round, should I say, there seemed to be more children going to the childminders because the schools are shut and only taking key worker children. So I just wondered if there was any support mechanism in place to give that, because they won't have all the resources that they require for online learning. So has anything been done to support the childminders at all?
So we, thanks Councillor Renshaw. I mean, we have been meeting with childcare providers, both in smaller and larger groups for some time now, in the same way that we have large-scale Zoom calls with head teachers and principals from across the city. So we've been providing them with the information and support that they need. They have access to our alert service and can contact us through that. And so we've been providing with all of the information and advice that they need. I've been contacted directly by a small group of childminders, and we've responded to the things that they have inquired about. Most of their information most of their needs seems to be about the interpretation of COVID restrictions and regulations, given that they may well have children of their own who come across particular circumstances in terms of being in school or being made part of a support bubble. Some of their inquiries are to do with financial support and just how they continue to operate in this really challenging time. And so our staff around our early years staff are in regular communication with them and picking up any support needs that we can support them with. I don't know if there's anything additional, Julie, that you'd want to add to that.
Just to say that, as you've said, Sam, that we are in regular communication. The early years service has Zoom calls with childminders. In addition, Councillor Venner, Sal, myself meet with providers right across the city on a sort of monthly basis. There have been provided certainly with starter packs in relation to PPE at the beginning of the pandemic. I do know that our consultant teachers have done an awful lot of work in terms of online resources, obviously trying to make, if you're thinking about sort of soft play, if you're thinking about water play, sand play, which are really sort of key features of early years development and ordinarily the earliest foundation stage, so the curriculum, that's all had to be tweaked, had to be risk assessed. had to be really ensure that the environments are COVID secure. So there's been an awful lot of support, information, advice and guidance that that's been provided to childminders in relation to those sorts of things. And actually the feedback that we've got a Zoom call this Friday, the feedback that we've had consistently throughout is a real appreciation for the level of communication and support that has been provided, and hence that continuing. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Julie. Sorry, did you want to come back?
Yeah, please, Chair. It's just that obviously with the online learning, it's going to be difficult for childminders who have got children who are in the upper classes of the primary schools. So I'm just wondering if any support mechanism is in place, because the childminders might not be aware of all that they're doing in the school. That might have been sent home to the parent, and then the childminders haven't got the resources there, which they actually require during the daytime while they've got the children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an area, I think it is a challenge, and I think it has been a challenge. And I think what's been really positive, to be quite honest with you, around the Zoom calls is we've been able to unpick and debate and to reach the answers and the solutions together, because in the beginning we didn't all have the answers to hand. And I think that's where the expertise of our consultant teachers, our early years practitioners, childminders themselves, other daycare providers being able to sort of have the debate, share good practice, share ideas, share creativity has really come into its own. So absolutely, Councillor Renshaw, the live issues as well, and live topics and live debates that we're having constantly, but there's absolutely been deliberate support being put in from the early years service around the issues that you're raising.
Okay, thank you. So if I could just quickly bring Kate in before we move on to Chris, and thank you for your patience, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, it was mentioned at the beginning that obviously schools are under a lot of pressure this time in terms of the actual number of key worker families requesting places. And I'm hugely sympathetic to schools, so I don't want this to sound critical, but I'm just wondering to what extent schools are actually checking the eligibility of families, or to what extent they're being supported to do that, to ensure that places aren't being taken up, where really they're not supposed to be. And also in relation to vulnerable pupils, to what extent has that increased in terms of the request for vulnerable pupils to attend? It's quite the definition of vulnerable pupils is actually quite wide, and I also wondered to what extent schools are being supported to actually identify those vulnerable children, because in certain circumstances it will probably be obvious to schools which children are vulnerable, but there are other children, such as those who are struggling to engage with remote learning, and children needing support in regards to mental health, which would be eligible as a vulnerable child as well. So to what extent are schools receiving guidance around that to ensure that they are identifying pupils that should be in school? And then also on the remote learning provision, obviously when schools went back in September, they were already legally obliged to have had their remote offer sort of prepared and ready. So that was quite a number of months ago. So I would have perhaps expected them to be a bit further along in relation to that, but I appreciate that it's a huge task when you've got children in school as well as those learning from home. But there does seem to be a real variance in the offers. Some children are actually benefiting from online lessons where others aren't, and I'd be grateful for an explanation for why there is such a variance. And then the only other couple of points were just in relation to you mentioned about lack of guidance around numbers for the bubbles, but also I think I read somewhere there was a suggestion that the 2-metre will come back into force. To what extent might that impact on the arrangements within school? And also just what's the local authority's position in regards to school staff being added to the list of people being prioritised for vaccinations? Thank you.
Okay, Sal, should we go to Dave with those ones?
I'll start. I think sure. Just to say that You rightly identify the issue about the numbers of key worker children, and actually, as I've said, I mean, we're only a day and a half past the announcement around where we go. So some of the numbers around vulnerable children, we'll have to come back to you on in terms of what that demand looks like and what the attendance looks like. I think in the key worker cohort, because people have been making contact, requesting places, then it's easier to get a bit of a handle on what that looks like. Some places are reporting up to 70% of their normal pupils claiming to be critical workers, and so we were working late into yesterday evening, just trying to come up with what support we might be able to provide in a more blanket way that gives some guidance to schools about how they might try and manage that, and giving a message of trying to keep as many children at home as possible. I want to run that past the Department for Education later today, if we can get a meeting in with them. So that's our plan. We've got a bit of a plan around how we might operate that. And one of the examples on that would be where you do have two parents at home and one is a key worker and the other isn't. Might be a criteria that could be applied, because I think trying to do 70%, anything between 50 and 70% of normal pupils coming in and a remote learning officer just makes the whole situation really difficult and challenging. We are supporting them with them. Where we've got the biggest issues in terms of the schools, we've got a plan to have individual conversations with those schools so that we can talk them through what might be a helpful approach at this stage. And as I said, on the vulnerable numbers, we'll come back to you. The numbers around the bubble again is something that we will pick up with Department for Education. I guess the previous advice on this was around having 15 children, but we also asked schools to undertake risk assessments based on their school circumstances, so the number of staff that they had available, the physical space that they had available, how that best fits, and that applies again to the 2 metre distancing rule. I know the NEU have set out quite a number of expectations around what that should look like, and we'll take some of that into account as we put forward some proposals to the DfE on all of those areas. Dave, I don't know if you want to come in on the quality of the offer.
Councillor Venner wanted to come in, so if I can bring Councillor Venner in, and then if there's anything for Dave.
Thank you. I actually wanted to come in on the previous point about early years. So do you want me to say that now, or do you want to come back to me?
Yeah, you go ahead, Councillor Venner.
Okay. Sorry, I meant to come in earlier. I've failed to manage the technological challenge of putting my hand up properly. I just wanted to say a couple of points in relation to the Zoom calls that Julie referred to. We also have, this is picking up Councillor Renshaw's point, we also have individual weekly meetings with each group of childcare providers. So that's childminders, group settings, wraparound care, because their needs are all quite different. Childminders have some very specific challenges working from home. The issues around early years really is a looming crisis within the childcare sector, because I mean they were financially precarious anyway before COVID, and even more so over the last months. But now being told they can stay open but only being funded for actual numbers is a disaster. Up to this term, they've been funded based on what their numbers would have been based on previous year's attendance, but from now they're only being funded for attendance, which will simply mean a lot of them will go out of business. And that's why it's really important we're having this regular contact with a lot of providers, so we can monitor, you know, how they're doing as individual providers, but also sufficiency issues in terms of the provision of childcare. It's really crucial that we have a thriving early years sector. It's really important for children's development. Marmot's done some work on the importance of early years in terms of health inequalities and life chances, which are life course issues. The importance of early years really can't be overstated. It's also a key plank of the economy, and a declining early years sector will particularly impact on women in the workplace. The pandemic has magnified many inequalities, including gender inequality. It's primarily been women doing home education of children, asking for furlough so they can do that, therefore being more at risk of redundancy. If we don't have adequate, good quality childcare where people can leave their children, that will impact on children, but it will also impact on families and particularly women in the workplace. Leeds University are currently doing a national piece of research that I'm on the steering group of about the impact of COVID on the early years sector, but with a reference to gender equality. So that it's a really key issue that we need to be keeping an eye on, but it is a looming crisis. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bennett.
If I could just come in just on the, just to finish off on the key worker thing, the actual definitions have now been published, and there is a slightly more stricter approach to the numbers. So we, our health and safety team are working on that closely with us, so that we can take that then defined list clear with the DFE, the approach that we want to take, and get that out to schools as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Did Dave want to add anything before we bring?
I was just going to add the same, Councillor Lamb, in terms of what Sal's just mentioned, that there's some new things that have just been published which will help in terms of finding the right way through this, because at the moment schools are needing to update their risk assessments, but until they get some clarity in terms of how many kids are in school, there's this confusion, and so they've got parents desperately wanting places, and schools having to turn them and saying we can't physically take all those children. So there's that back, you know, there's this problems with parents saying coming back at the school and so on. So hopefully we'll get some more clarity on that today.
Dave, sorry, could I just quickly ask? At the beginning of the first lockdown, it was only send your child to school if you absolutely need to. If you've got a parent at home, one parent at home, and they can be safe at home, then keep them at home. And then that changed to they should be in school. So which is it this time? Do we actually know? Has the government been clear on that?
I think that's one of the issues, Kate, is that the messaging is very different. So the messaging in the last lockdown came sort of stay home whenever possible, and your kids are safer at home. The message that hasn't come through in the same sort of the same way this time, which has caused some confusion, and we've made it very clear in their initial announcement, that it's only if it's one parent. So the eligibility would be one parent is a key worker. So that would give you eligibility, which has increased the number. So those two things together has increased the numbers requesting places. And I think that messaging is potentially what needs to change to give schools and local authorities that clarity of what actually the government is expecting. I think it's around their expectations. What are they expecting? Do they want kids at home or at school, and how? Because with so many numbers in school, it's how you manage to run face-to-face learning, virtual learning, and also do the government sort of like aim to reduce the transmission. So it's just a complicated setup at the moment.
I think also there's, I mean, I think to just put into the mix, there is, you know, it's where we are in this journey now, and we are many months into it, and people have had, you know, 2 previous periods of lockdown. Children themselves want to be back in school, you know, so Joe next door said to me, who knew you could miss school? You know, and so there's that, and you know, just everybody's general tolerance for being able to homeschool plays into that. So you can see that demand's going to go up because more and more people would want their children in school. But I think we're getting to a point where we might get a bit more of a clearer sense of what that looks like, which will help to get the balance right in schools.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So can I just check, Chris, is there anything you particularly wanted to highlight from the performance report?
I mean, there's a lot of information in there, so it may be easier if people have specific questions. I'd say what we are seeing in the report is, whilst we've tried to make it as regular as possible, we are seeing some of those gaps in the data, particularly around attainment and attendance. That information, obviously, we won't have a lot of that for a long time. The social care information remains up to date, and some of the other figures that come from the Children and Young People's Plan are in there as well. What we've tried to do is provide reassurance that despite the complications of COVID, work is still continuing, the most vulnerable are supported, and hopefully that's coming through in the report. And some of the information will, over the coming months as well, reflect that, again, particularly around attendance. I know we've talked about that already, so there will be differences in the way perhaps we talk about a bit of what the information means. We may not be able to place Leeds in context to some of our comparator groups as we have previously done for a while, but hopefully the information in there shows that we are continuing on the key areas and focusing on those key areas. So perhaps if anyone has questions, I could try and answer those.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Councillor Flynn, you had a question.
Sorry, it wouldn't unmute. Is it unmuted now? Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's regarding I think something Chris just said about and the message from Julie, I think it was, about vulnerable children. Childline have given me some figures which indicate a significant increase in contacts since the first lockdown occurred. Something like well over 40% of contacts have increased a month. And within that, over 80% of contacts from adults reporting emotional abuse of children, and over a third, I think, of contacts from children themselves reporting an increase in physical abuse and of neglect. And Childline have also done a review of the figures from April, I think, until November, which are still showing those three areas having a significant increase in pre-pandemic levels. The figures that we've seen this morning don't seem to reflect that. I acknowledge that the Childline figures are national figures there for the UK, but obviously on an average type basis, you would expect them to be something similar for the major cities like Leeds are. I appreciate that, you know, it's extremely difficult in the circumstances we've had over the last 9 to 10 months to have the same kind of control over children at risk than we've had previously. It strikes me now we're into another lockdown, admittedly not as severe as the first. Things aren't likely to improve. If social care is up to date, Chris, you mentioned that, I just wonder why our figures aren't reflecting the same as Childline's are.
In terms of the referrals that we've had into social care, yes, you're right. They dropped to, at one point, 20% fewer than perhaps what we'd expect at the same time of year. We would attribute a lot of that to during the first lockdown due to schools closing, because we do receive a lot of contact from schools. Since September, we have seen the referral numbers return more towards the level we would expect for that time of year. So September, December 2020, the figures were broadly similar to 2019. Yes, we don't know what the impact of the current lockdown will be. Probably two things I would just mention. The levels of contact that we've had into our duty and advice team didn't drop by 20%, but those that turned into a referral, that number dropped slightly. So overall contact wasn't as low. I would guess that, not knowing Childline's approach particularly, but that is more anyone calls that. So I could see why those numbers perhaps would remain higher, whereas when we're talking in the performance report, we're talking referrals, that's contacts that have been considered require a social work intervention. The other thing I would say is that, yes, across the country, there have been some local authorities that have reported a rise, but there's also been a number that have reported a reduction, like Leeds as well. So there isn't a consistent pattern across the country, but some local authorities have spiked and some have not spiked. There has been research carried out that suggested that different local authorities again may see a spike once we got into September and then onwards, but those models haven't been consistent across all local authorities. So it's a very different picture from the anecdotal evidence I've heard from online forums I've been in. But what I would say is I'm confident that the figures that we've got reflect what's come through to social care. However, it's the non-recording, obviously, that we can't comment, or certainly I can't comment on from the performance figures, unfortunately. I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Sal, anything to add?
Yeah, just, I mean, I guess, you know, the contacts that we receive, we, you know, got a robust front door system that where when people make contact with us, they have a conversation with a social worker. We analyse the information that we've got and then make decisions with those people about who's best placed to respond to any particular need that there isn't. What I would say is that quite a lot of the work that we've done during lockdown on a multi-agency basis actually has been done at a local level that I think is different to quite a lot of other places. I think we have recently implemented our early help hubs where we have the police, health services, education, learning professionals, social care professionals coming together to provide direct help and support to children and families in their local area. And I think that many of the contacts that have come in, as Chris said, the numbers overall aren't down in terms of contact, but we've been able to direct those people to support through those arrangements that we've had at that local level, so people are getting the help directly. I would say that anecdotally that in terms of some of the circumstances that have come through, there have some of them have been impacted by lockdown, that there have been some longer standing issues that have been picked up once a referral has been received that might have been picked up sooner in other circumstances, and some of the levels of seriousness of some of the cases has been we have noticed that's been greater. But in that first lockdown period, the contacts didn't go down. Because the school number went down, actually that was replaced by public referring in. So our numbers of referrals that came in from the public the number of contacts went up. Families have been reporting a positive response to those early help hubs, because what they're saying is we are getting in there and providing them directly with help and support for the things that they need, which has really developed the relationships that we've got there. So I think there is you know, we continue to work closely across the agencies to make sure that response to need is as effective as possible. And where issues are raised with us, that we consider them very carefully and respond appropriately.
Councillor Flynn, did you want to come back briefly?
Very briefly, yeah. I'm quite happy, Sal. I'm sure that once the cases are reported to you, they'll be picked up and dealt with eminently suitably. It's the ones that aren't being picked up, looking at those childline figures, that I'm concerned about. But clearly, we don't have enough time to go into that today. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we do need to move on to it. We've overrun slightly on that, but there's an awful lot to get into. So can I just check that all members are happy to note the contents of the report before we move on? It is very comprehensive and detailed. So, and also we've covered quite a wide scope of issues there. Okay, so if we move on, we're going to take the next two items together, which is financial health monitoring and budget proposals. We've got about half an hour on this, so pretty much come what may, I'm going to move on at about 11:50. So please don't be discouraged from answering your questions. I just encourage brevity in questions and answers, please. So I think Councillor Venner, you wanted to start off on this, and I'll bring Councillor Pryor in, Sal, and then I guess Tim will probably take us through as usual. So Councillor Venner, please.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to the financial health monitoring, as you'll see in the report, the children and families overspend on children looked after is a reduction in the overspend from the previous reporting period. It's referred to in the report that there's been a national issue around providers increasing costs during the pandemic when we do need to use external residential placements, although our numbers have actually gone down in terms of the numbers of children that we've got in external placements. Our focus is very much on prevention and early help, as Sal's referred to, and that's reflected in the fact that when our children looked after numbers have gone down overall, we've seen a particular decrease in the number of children, little children and babies coming into care, which reflects all our early help work. But as Sal referred to, we have seen an increase in the number of adolescents coming into care, and they do tend to have more complex needs and are more likely to require placements, therefore, that are more expensive. But when I presented the annual fostering report to the Executive Board late last year, that refers to the fact that during the pandemic, we've had a really unprecedented rise in the number of people wanting to become foster carers. So it is an aspiration to bring down the number of children that are in external residential placements. We do benchmark very well against other authorities in the number of children we do have externally, but we want to bring that down further. With regard to the budget proposals, the paper does refer to the comprehensive spending review, and our funding gap is now, for next year, is now 94.5 million, down from 118 million. So that did bring us in some additional funding, but not enough. It's very disappointing that there wasn't really anything in the spending review for children and young people. That's very reflected in feedback from the early years, from the children's sector in terms of the Children's Commissioner, children's charities, etc. I think the general view is it in fact wasn't very comprehensive in not acknowledging children and young people, despite a huge amount of lobbying from the Local Government Association, the Children's Commissioner, children's charities about the fact that the pandemic has impacted disproportionately on children and young people with regard to mental health, the economic fallout, the growth in child poverty, the growth in youth unemployment. As an example, most of the funding for youth services that was announced has gone to the National Citizenship Service, which only works in a very narrowly focused way with just 16 to 17-year-olds. No additional funding for local authority youth work, despite the fact that we've really needed those services during this time that's been so critical and challenging for young people. So it's within that context and a really distinct national focus, lack of national focus on children and young people that we're having to put forward these budget proposals. And as we've said previously in Scrutiny, we need to make our contribution as a directorate to the cuts that the council has to make, but whilst not having a detrimental impact on children and families, and maintaining our commitment to investing in early years, in early help and prevention, which is very much the cornerstone of the journey we've been on from inadequate to outstanding, and also prevents children coming into care, which is costly in both human costs and financially. As we've said previously, we very much welcome input from Scrutiny in terms of making sure that we've got our thinking in the right place. And the one thing I wanted to draw your attention to was that, as well as reductions in spending, we've also focused, as each directorate has, on where we can increase income. And in terms of proposals since we last presented to you, we have set a more ambitious income target against our dissemination work. So that's the work that we do externally, where we're supporting other local authorities to improve their services for children and young people. So we've got a higher income target against that, as well as the reductions that we've put forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Pryor, did you want to add anything at this point?
No, happy to go straight into questions.
Thank you. And Sal, anything from you by way of introduction?
On the financial monitoring, I think Councillor Benner's covered that well. I mean, I think those increased charges in external placements are a major issue nationally. We do benefit in Leeds because we lead a consortia through the White Rose framework of how we procure placements, and that does help us to capitalise on being a bigger buyer in the market, so that we tend to get a lower cost for placements compared to a number of other places, and helps us to manage some of those increases. But this is an area where there is particular pressure up and down the country at this moment in time, because as Councillor Benner said, you know, the pandemic is impacting on adolescents particularly, and that pressure exists nationally. So lots of places are seeing increases in the number of adolescents that are coming into care, and those are the placements that are the most difficult to get and tend to be the most expensive. And so even though our increases in costs around the placements that we've got aren't as great as elsewhere, they are in there and they are creating a pressure for us. And added to that is our ability to work with and move on children and young people, given some of the restrictions that have been in place over the last year or so. So that does add to our pressure in monitoring overall. And then in terms of the savings proposals, you know, Tim will talk you through those, but again, reiterating Councillor Benner's point, trying to maximise income where possible, avoid you know, cuts to frontline services where possible, to try and manage what we're trying to do, but also overall across the council, you know, our total savings proposals come to around 11 million out of a total of initially a total well over 100 million. So I think across the council there has been some recognition of prioritising services for the most vulnerable. Happy to move on to Tim.
Okay, so I just wondered, Sal, if it was worth just asking Louise to introduce herself and if there was anything by way of context, and then go to Tim. So Louise, is that okay if you just introduce yourself, and then I don't know if there's anything you want to add at this point, or if you're just on hand for questions.
Absolutely, Chair, thank you. Yes, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Head of Finance supporting children and families. And I have to say, I think Councillor Benner and Sal have both provided an excellent overview of where we are financially, both this year and around next year's proposal as well. So I've nothing specific to add, but I am happy to be available for questions if those do come up.
Okay, thank you, Louise. So shall we hand over to Tim just to talk us through where we are? And then I've already got a couple of hands up for questions, so we'll then take those as we go along. So Tim, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the benefits of going last is that most of the detail has already been gone through, but I will, if I can, just spend a few minutes talking about the proposals that were new in the December's Executive Board report. Sal rightly identifies that so far we have put forward proposals for £11 million worth of savings. This Scrutiny Board and the Scrutiny Board Working Group have had opportunity to look at the detail of £8.5 million of the proposals that we've put forward so far. So I was just going to concentrate on the £2.5 million that is new in the December Executive Board proposals. I'm conscious that it is a very, very long report, so I was just going to, if it would help, concentrate on page 186, which is a table of the proposals that are new in this report. And there are 5 proposals there, which total the £2.5 million. The first one is around taking the opportunity to review our experience of the last few months and look at some of the funding that's been provided in the budget strategy. And in light of the experience of the last few months, we think that we can reduce the increase that children and families will see for demand and demography and inflationary based pressures that have been included into the financial strategy, and that's £560,000. The second proposal is to seek a further contribution from the Central Services Schools block. Now, the important thing to note about this is that this is within the gift of Leeds Schools Forum. It is not something that we can just do in isolation. Just before Christmas, we got final notification from the DFE as to the likely level of the Central School Services block. Members might be aware that the Central School Services block is one of the 4 blocks of the Dedicated Schools grant. It is by far the lowest and totals around about £5 million. But the settlement that we got just before December was about £275,000 more than our original assumptions. And we will be seeking Schools Forum approval to have another contribution of £120,000 to support the budget. The work that we've been doing on looking at existing contracts has identified that working with individual suppliers and looking at it on a contract by contract basis, we would be able to negotiate efficiencies of a further 270,000 with commercial and third sector providers of services that we commission as a directorate. The fourth proposal, as Councillor Venner highlights, is a more pragmatic approach to estimating the amount of income that we'd get from the sector-led improvement work. This provides for another £1.25 million worth of income into the budget. One of the issues that we've had in previous years is the late notification of grant regime settlements. And over the last few years, it has been the case that we ordinarily see increases in grant either very late in the process or indeed during the financial year. The amount of grant that we get in total has settled at round about the 13 or 14 million pounds a year. And these proposals effectively take up the assumed level of grant income in year to round about the 14 million pounds level, which is where it's settled out in previous years. The final proposal takes the option to delete some vacant posts in respect of partnerships and health and workforce development. And these posts, when we developed the initial proposals, weren't vacant, but given that some colleagues have moved on, I think it will be appropriate to identify savings of about £300,000 from that area of work. Those 5 proposals total another 2.5 million, which makes our contribution 11 million overall. I'll pause there if that's all right, Councillor Lamb, as I'm conscious that members of the Scrutiny Board may have some questions about the details of that.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So we start with Councillor Illingworth, please.
Yeah, I was going to ask, welcome the proposals for increasing income, but I just wonder how realistic this is going to be for increasing income from what appear to be other cash-strapped local authorities. That they may well agree with us that income should increase, but be in no position to deliver it, the same as we are, essentially. And are we robbing Peter to pay Paul in this situation?
This is effectively via the Partners in Practice grant regime, whereby we'll be working with other local authorities. And those other local authorities are generally funded by the DFE to engage with organisations like Leeds to help them on their improvement journey. So some of the local authorities will be provided with the grant funding to engage Leeds to do this work with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Is that okay, Councillor Smith? So, Councillor Renshaw, you had your hand up and it went down again.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really a bit of reassurance that I'd like to make sure that youth services are still going to be provided throughout the city. In ours in Robin Hood, we just totally depend on local authority youth services, and once I'm reassured that that is going to continue, then I'll probably sleep better.
I can respond to that, Chair, if that's okay. We haven't put forward any reductions to the youth service in any of our proposals.
Thank you.
Will you sleep tonight now, Councillor Renshaw?
I will sleep a lot better now I know that youth services are going to be retained, as long as we've got the same workforce.
That's a relief all round, I think. So, any other questions or comments at this point? Jackie, please.
Yeah, I just want to, it's just the last deletion of recently vacant post to strengthening families and protecting children. Will there be, will we have an impact without those posts being there? That's my question.
Well, I feel I've got to say yes, because we'll need to find ways to cover the work. However, given that the posts are vacant, we will look to identify efficiencies and seek to join up some of those teams and look at the management arrangements. But as ever with some of these proposals where there are staffing implications, it does require a reconfiguration of services, and it does make the job a little bit more difficult to do it with fewer people around.
I'll just add, I mean, I think what we've tried to do where we are taking this sort of approach is to avoid those cuts being to frontline, those people that are engaged in frontline service delivery, so that there's, that the services that we provide directly to families aren't affected. So we try and, the approach that we've tried to take to some of this is to see where there are opportunities to streamline some of the management and leadership arrangements, or to think about some of the posts that the opportunities have come up in posts that aren't engaged in work that is to deliver directly to families. So that's where these have been identified. But we're having to do quite a lot of work to think about where else that responsibility might sit, how we might do that better. Can we work better across both the council in terms of working with other parts of the council, where them and with our partners, where sometimes there can be levels of duplication. So we're just trying to take some of those things out of the mix to try and make the efficiencies that we can. We are having to make these cuts within the context of £120 million gap, out of which children's services have had a smaller proportion to make.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Drinkwaters next, please.
Yeah, a point really on the same vein as the last question. It's just there appears to be about £2 million of staffing costs being cut, and a lot of that is defined in the reports as business as usual. Really, I just wanted to put on record my objection to that being put under a business as usual heading, because I think that's misleading to the public. I don't think you can cut that much staff and still deliver business as usual. Somebody has to pick up the slack. So you're either asking people to do more for the same, or some services are going to suffer. So it's just really to put that on record. It's an objection to the language we use, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Sal, did you want to respond on that?
I accept the point that's been made. I mean, I think what we have to do in these challenging circumstances is really go back and look at everything that we do. And you know, we've got over 2,000 staff working in children's services, and what we have to do is reprioritise the things that we are doing. You know, we're left with very little choice but to make changes to how we operate, think about where there are efficiencies that we can find, and continually reanalyze how we do things. So I accept the underlying point, but also there are often things when you're under this level of pressure that you look at and think, if we did that differently, we could get the same outcome, but with less cost. We're not always entirely operating at our most productive and efficient. And you know, one of the things that being under this sort of pressure does is make us look at each part of the service to see how we can do that. And often some of that is to do with the whole system rather than individual bits of it. So what can we do to maximise the impact of the whole council together? So you know, so we are looking at how there are where there are overlaps in terms of what we do in the communities and environments and adults and health do, but also specifically partners. And I think if you look back over the other proposals that we've had in there, you know, a number of them involve our work with health, for example, and whether there's more work we can do there to maximise efficiencies.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll bring in Councillor Gruen next, and then I've got Councillor Renshaw with another question. So, Councillor Gruen, please.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're all very upset about the cuts that have to be made, obviously, and it inevitably will make a difference to the quality of work that we can carry out. My question really is, how do the individual portfolios of the council achieve their target? Does everybody take a proportional cut according to what they've got? Or is it weighted according to the impact those cuts are likely to have within the services? The question is really about, it's probably easier to cut, for example, flower baskets in the town centre, nice as they are, than it is something which is going to impact on children. So how do the overall targets for each service or group of services actually get agreed? What are the factors that are taken into account, please?
So I think, I mean, I'll bring Tim in a sec. No, go on, Tim. You're going to.
Who's placed to answer? Would it be Louise better answer that?
I mean, I'm happy to give you a bit of an overview from my perspective, which is that we've tried to avoid setting specific targets for the various portfolios, and really try and work on this as a corporate team to say this is what the overall gap looks like. Where can we, you know, where can we find the efficiencies that are necessary? And I have to say that both adults and health and children's services have been prioritised in those discussions. So there has been a level of protection for us, so that other parts of the council have had to take a much greater hit. So you know, there's a number of ways that you can always break it down, and you could divide it equally between all of the portfolios, etc. But we haven't done it in that way. We've come at it as a team to say where are there that we can find those efficiencies, and remembering at all times that our priority is those services that protect and support the most vulnerable in the city. That has been a specific approach to that, Councillor Gruen.
Okay, thank you for that. And just before we get to the end of this item, I'm going to bring Councillor Renshaw in again in a second. Just worth people thinking, and if they want to make a comment now, is there anything specific that we want to feed back as a board to the executive board? And also, perhaps if Sal could come back shortly, I'm aware there's another £5.3 million of savings to be found before February's executive board. And it'd be useful if you just comment if there's any expectation that children's services are to find a portion of that, or is what we're seeing today the end in terms of what children's services are expected to find. So, Councillor Renshaw, do you want to come in? And then I don't know if anyone else has got any comments.
Mine's quite similar to Councillor Drinkwater's actually, because I'm quite concerned about the health and well-being of the staff who are obviously taking on the greater width of responsibilities and service. Because like Councillor Drinkwater said, you can't cut the services, can you, without imposing more responsibilities on the shoulders of other people? Because with children and young people, it's all crucial. And I just wondered if any consideration had been taken into account for the staff who are going to have to deal with all these ongoing services and concerns for these children and young people, which, you know, I find paramount to anything else, but that's my view. And it's the staff who are delivering it who I'm going to be concerned about now as well, because after 10 years of austerity, we're already in that point where we've squeezed and squeezed and squeezed from children's services. So I just want, you know, to be reassured that the staff are going to be considered as well.
Thanks, Councillor Renshaw. I mean, I think we are at all times working really closely with our staff, as you would expect. You know, their well-being is of paramount importance to us, and Councillor Venner and I have large-scale Zoom calls with many of our frontline staff, for example, so that we can hear directly from them about some of the challenges and pressures that they face. But obviously, at every layer of the organisation, you know, well-being is a critical issue, and we have regular well-being check-ins for all of our staff. We know that actually the better we look after our staff, you know, the better the conditions that they are working in, the better able they are to support the most vulnerable in the city. So there's an absolute direct correlation between those two things. So we do as much as we can to try and support them. I think the other thing for us in children's services that's important to remember is that it works as a whole system, and our relationships with our partners become really important in some of this. And the work that we've done over the last 10 years to really improve the quality of practice that exists within the organisation, the quality of the relationships that we have with partners, ultimately contributes to you know, better outcomes for children and young people, right? So we've had that looked at and tested, that kids are getting a better service, and we see that in their outcomes. So we have less children having to come into the care system. We know that that's done safely. So from an outcomes perspective, those things look better. And when we do that right, when we get the practice right, actually it costs us less. So this whole idea of trying to shift our what we spend from crisis response to early help and prevention is what can help us to save the money, and we keep that in mind at all times. So we're always trying to shift the system so that we are spending less on care costs, particularly where outcomes aren't great and it costs a lot of money. So we want to do early help prevention wherever we can. So I think part of our consideration throughout this period of time has been not to lose that strategy. That's what we are concentrating our energy on. And we haven't seen spikes in the numbers of children looked after. We're still seeing a steady reduction there. And through our quality assurance and performance management frameworks, we ensure that all of that is happening safely, that we're not just drawing lines in different places for that. Now, any director of children's services would say to you, yes, I'd like £20 million more at any given time, but that's not the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So we have to maximise what we do with our partners across the city with what we've got, and the strategy has been working here, and you know, our intention is for it to continue to do so.
Okay, thank you, Sal. And Tim, you wanted to come in.
Sorry, Councillor Lam, I think the point has already been made.
Okay, no problem at all. So Councillors Renshaw and Gruen, you still got your hands up. Did you have a further point or?
Sorry, Chair, no, I left it up by mistake.
No problem. Kate, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, it was just a quick question. It was just around the potential impact of the new strain, which I don't think has really been fully felt in Leeds yet. And obviously, if it's, you know, as kind of contagious as it's being reported, which it clearly is, then I just was wondering around sort of to what extent that might impact on the workforce in terms of staff absence, and how that might impact in terms of finance with regards to, say, having to use supply workforce and additional costs associated with potentially quite a high level of staff absence to, you know, in sort of near future.
So my understanding in terms of new variant is that where we've detected it, it is prevalent in Yorkshire and Humber region in much lower levels than in other places. But if we were to, in our contingency planning, if we were to assume significant increases in the same way that we've seen in other parts of the country, then there would be a significant impact on some of our workforce issues. I mean, the only other thing I would say in terms of how that where we might go is that the variant is spreading more prolifically in London and the southeast at this moment in time, and their rates, as we've said earlier on, in terms of infections are 3-4 times higher than where they are in Leeds. And it's hoped that the lockdown has come in time for us in Leeds to stop that kind of escalation. So it may be that we don't, you know, we can predict that we'll see an increase, but we're hoping that it's not at that scale because we've got the lockdown in place now. So that does become important, I think, from my point of view, about the message of staying at home and abiding by the regulations and restrictions. So we'll continue to push that. I think if the other side of it is that we've got the hope of the vaccine, and so in some ways, and we are working really closely right across the system in Leeds to make sure that we've got systems in place so that the only thing that is going to hold us back in terms of being able to progress with the vaccination programme is the supply side of it, which we can't control as much, but actually systems are in place here in Leeds for us to be able to really push on with the vaccine. And so what that does, I suppose, is give you a window that of period of time that you have to manage, and in a sense, what we would do if we are seeing significant impacts on workforce is to look right across the council at those things that we absolutely need to do to prioritise and to get through, and how do we redeploy those staff to help us to manage that for this period of time that we're going to need it. Also, there are, given the lockdown restrictions, there are lots of people who aren't doing what they aren't able to work on the tasks that they were previously doing. So that's just a consequence of the whole thing slowing down, and it's looking at whether we can use them in certain places to support the effort that we need to. We obviously have a mind on at all times ensuring that we are fulfilling our statutory responsibilities and supporting the most vulnerable people, and we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that continues.
Okay, thank you, Sal. And just on the 5.3 million that's to go to Executive Board in February, are you expecting to have anything further on that?
At this stage, we aren't putting anything further forward. I think there's some kind of council-wide proposals that will be looked at to try and find that gap. Is that right, Louise?
Yes, that's correct, Sal.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing any further questions or comments on this. I'll just check if Councillor Venner or Pryor had any final comments they wanted to make.
No, nothing to add.
Fine, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So given sort of the mood of the questions, I'd perhaps propose that we just note what's in the report. I think it would be probably incorrect to say we were happy about it, but I think we're understanding of the position and why the decisions are there. So if there are, unless there's any dissenting voices, I'd suggest that as a board we just note the contents of the report, if everyone's happy with that. Okay, good. So we can move on now to our last substantive item, which is the plans for statutory pupil assessments during 2021. Obviously, things have changed somewhat since the paper was written. So I think we've got Erica with us as well. So if you're on the call, Erica, did you want to introduce yourself? And then perhaps Councillor Pryor might want to kick off, and then we can go from there. So do we have Erica?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I'm Erica Hines. I'm a Senior School Improvement Advisor specialising in secondary.
Thank you, Erica, and good to have you with us. And Councillor Pryor, did you want to introduce the item?
No, I think it's best if Erica just kind of goes through the paper briefly, then we'll go straight into questions.
No problem. So Erica, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, you're absolutely right. Things have changed. So as you remember, we submitted a letter to Ofqual and to the DFE, and also there were a number of announcements made by the DFE, which was basically these main points, that exams would be moved back 3 weeks, except for English and Maths GCSE, where one exam would be held in May, which you know, with the idea that you would at least sit one paper, even if you were ill, you would sit one paper, and then your grade could be aggregated from that one paper. Grading would still be in line with 2020. So as you remember, 2020 grades were higher than 2019. So the idea is that this particular cohort won't be disadvantaged compared to the year before. Some pupils, particularly clinically extremely vulnerable, would be allowed to take exams at home. There would be advance notice of topic areas and supporting materials such as formula sheets. If a pupil missed some or all exams, assessment could be, their coursework, if there was any, could be taken into account. There was also a planned section of contingency exams. Now this is new. The idea was that there would be your normal GCSE A-levels in June, and then 3 weeks later, at the beginning of July, there would be contingency exams offering one paper per subject, so that if you'd missed all your exams in June, you had another chance of taking them. The pupils who weren't able to have any coursework or take any exams would be able to have a centre assessed grade. The performance tables would just look at subjects taken, destinations and attendance data. And they were also promising to have a look at this, set up an expert advisory group, which would try to find some form of mitigation for pupils who had suffered more time out of school, maybe because they'd had to self-isolate or because their school had been particularly hard hit by the virus. And obviously that would have been something that we would need to have watched really carefully, because certainly in the autumn term, schools in the north were more impacted by the virus. But as you know, there was the announcement on Monday night, and the update was basically that in the circumstances, it was not possible for exams to go ahead fairly in the summer. So exams will not go ahead, but the Secretary for State of State for Education will ask Ofqual to consult on an approach, an alternative approach to allow students to progress fairly. So that's probably the key sentence. what this alternative approach to allow students to progress fairly will look like. And at this point, we don't know what that is. So that's probably an update of where we are. Ofqual have put out a statement today where they've basically asked pupils to engage fully in their studies, so to carry on working. So that's slightly different from before, where if you were meant to be doing exams in March or in June, in the March lockdown, that was it. They were cancelled and you weren't actually expected to do any more work. So they are urging pupils to keep up with their work. Does that give you a broad outline of the situation? Please feel free to ask me any questions.
I think it does, Eric. Just to add in, Councillor Lamb, that the Education Secretary is expecting to make a further statement today. So we're looking for that. And in many ways, the discussions that we had with you and the Scrutiny Board last term were really useful, and you know, it's a complicated issue, but the principles behind the letters that you and Councillor Pryor wrote off on behalf of Scrutiny still remain, in terms of, but I think we would still want to see decisions being made quickly to try and get as much fairness in the system, you know, so all those things that we discussed last term are still very relevant in terms of what would be expected to be some form of consultation coming up down the line over the next month, and people might want to engage in that as we move forward to try and get the right decisions and the best outcome for the young people in Leeds. There's no announcements. Just to add on to the testing, there's been no further announcements in terms of SATs at Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 1. So we're still waiting further information on the primary level testing.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Has there been any indication of the timing and the nature of the consultation yet, and sort of when we're expecting decisions to be made? Because these things have been considered. It's not. It's fast changing, but it's not totally out of the blue. We know that it has been getting consideration about alternatives for some time.
Yeah. I'm hoping that this afternoon, when the Secretary of State makes his announcement, that we would get some clearer indication of when the expectation in terms of timings and things. But at the moment, we don't have that information of what time scale they're looking at.
Okay. So are there any questions or comments? So no hands up as yet. So the next question from me, before I bring Jackie in, would be what usefully can Scrutiny add to what it's already done on this in terms of feeding into those consultations, if anything?
I think you know, we had a very useful discussion, didn't we, last time, where we determined the principles that we wanted to put forward to the DFE and to Ofqual, and probably when we see the consultation, they tend to be quite prescriptive, but there is normally an open box for comments. So it could be that we consider the consultation as a scrutiny group, a scrutiny board, but also think again about the principles that need to underpin any strategy that's put in place.
Okay, thank you. So I'll bring Jackie in, and then it'd be useful if members could have a think about what they'd want Scrutiny's approach to this to be. If you're content that actually what we've fed in already is sufficient, and that that expresses our view, and effectively we'd accept that it was going to be the officers and executive members that would lobby, and we are happy with that position. Or if we want to do anything further, do we want a meeting when we know we could perhaps have a working group potentially, but so it'd be useful to hear people's views on that. So Jackie, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think for me, I've got an A-level student, so I suppose I'm more in line with what the young people are thinking at this moment in time. I think they're all online ready for exam session. Now it's up in the air again. So I think for me, even if there was consultation, it needs to be done with as much haste as possible. I think the delay for students now, they're up in the air. The teachers don't know what to tell them. They don't know what to do. I think they're all extremely worried, especially if they want to go to university in September, October time. So it's all up in the air, and I think the most haste is necessary, in my mind. I don't mind if we have to do consultation, I do that, but we need to do it quickly.
Thank you, Jackie. Celia, you wanted to come in.
Yes, just to support what Jackie finished with there about consultation. I think it'd be useful for a scrutiny board or a working group for speed, perhaps, to actually consider the consultation and see if there's anything different that we need to inform them of.
The consultation, what will happen, the process is that Ofqual will put a consultation out, and it will have a window, maybe 3 weeks or something. So although we'd like that to happen quickly, we are constrained by the dates that they put around that consultation.
Councillor Lamb, I think I think we've got an agreed position across ourselves and the scrutiny board that we have put forward. I think it's been acknowledged and responded to, probably taken into account in terms of where we're headed. But we're in the middle of the decision about exams just having been made a couple of days ago. There'll be discussions taking place between DFE and Ofqual, and obviously the consultation will come out, and I just wonder whether it's better to let those things play out and see where we are, rather than us trying to plan further working group in this area, given the uncertainty of it already, to be honest. And maybe, if once the consultation comes out, that feels like a more appropriate time for people to have some time to consider it, then that would seem the best way forward, really. But at this stage, we're in the middle of quite a lot of tricky decision making that's going on, where we probably can't influence the direction of travel.
Okay, thanks, Sal. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm minded to sort of echo the comments. I think it was Jeff Barton, the union, the head teachers leader union, who said that there's a time that actually sometimes you need to sit back and just think about things properly before you rush into it, and this is one of them. And within that, I'm aware from conversations I've had with people who are working in Ofqual at the minute that this is not sudden. Although it's a sudden policy shift, Ofqual have been working on plan Bs, etc. They have been putting forward policy papers for ministers, so there has been some background work going on about it. I think one of the difficulties now is going to be, what do you fall back to if you haven't got mocks, if you haven't got what a teacher's assessing is different before. Even other nations that previously made a decision to cancel exams will now have to review this because they were going to a situation where they were going to use teacher assessments based on in-school learning, which isn't going to happen. My preferred option, I think, would be, as people said, wait for the consultation to come out, but it is then a consultation, and I think that it would be right, the executive members would reply on behalf of the council's administration, and opposition groups can do the same. I'm not sure really where I see a role for scrutiny, in that we've already asked the questions in terms of the principles and the boundaries. So personally, I don't really see if there should be effort going into a working group when effectively it's going to come down to a series of options that need a political decision that will be made by ministers, and we can all respond politically, I think, in our various roles without having to take up scrutiny time. That'd just be my view, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Debbie, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just to comment really that I take on board what everybody's saying about the need to wait for what the consultation is going to be on. but I just wonder if we could just perhaps ask that I think it's probably time for nationally a shift to a final worst case scenario, consult on that, decide on that and stick to that decision, because I think the extraordinary pressure that's being put on schools to be responsive and agile and thinking about what it will do this if this happens and that if that happens, we're way beyond that now. This has to be the last and final consultation, and then we go with it.
Okay, I've seen quite a bit of support for that, Debbie. Councillor Forsyth, please.
I just wanted to respond that I think the idea of us having a working group once the consultation is out is a good idea. As far as these being a political decision, this is answering Councillor Stevenson's point. There's more than just us as politicians here on the scrutiny group. There's some obviously many more voices that we need to hear and they need to feed into that. Thank you.
Councillor Lamb, can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I can't find my hand icon to put my hand up. Sorry. I was just going to say that actually just on Councillor Forsyth's point there, we would be encouraging all our school leaders and all our education community to feed into that consultation independently as well, so that they will be hearing all the voices from a wide range of of different perspectives from the Leeds community. So just to sort of say, I don't think necessarily needs to be just one group doing it. We would try and be encouraging as many people as possible to get the best possible feedback into that consultation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pryor, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think some of the points about saying that this was something, an announcement that was made only a couple of days ago, so it's difficult to comment now, are completely valid. But I think it's worth putting on record how useful it was to have Scrutiny's input on this, to have that kind of cross-party and with the co-opted members, to have that broad view of what the best thing was. So I do think there is real value in Scrutiny coming back to this after the consultation. And I know Councillor Stevenson said things have been people have been working on this for some time now, but actually the line from government was no, absolutely not. Exams are going ahead, full stop. So the line from government wasn't, this is plan A and we've also got plan B. So actually this is new. This is something we're going to need to deal with in the future. And it goes beyond a political issue. It's not just, he said, she said, let's argue with politics. These are children's lives going for the next few years. This is something that I think we need to discuss seriously. And I think Scrutiny really does have a role to play in that.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Pryor. Yeah, I think that's everyone that wanted to speak at the moment. So in terms of taking this forward, it's obviously rapidly moving. I get briefed regularly by Sal and Councillors Venner and Pryor always are very good at getting in touch if there's anything urgent that comes up. So I suggest we kind of leave it open and flexible, and clearly the Scrutiny Board have got a very, very strong interest in this issue, and I think we just need to see how it plays out to decide what's the best way to move forward. And myself and Angela can keep in touch with the whole board via email as things progress to keep you up to date, if everybody's happy with that as an approach. Dave, did you want to make a comment?
No, I think that's we can keep you posted, like you said, via Sal briefings and of what's coming through to us from DFE.
Okay, and Kate, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly ask, to what extent will the direct voices of families and particularly of affected pupils be taken into consideration in the consultation? How will that operate? Do we know, or have we thought about how we might bring in their voices?
Can I answer that?
Of course.
I mean, that's a really excellent point. You might be aware that in addition to the primary bronze and the secondary bronze group, we did actually set up a youth bronze group with the aim that the pupils then feed in their views to, in fact, the secondary bronze. So we do have a mechanism for garnering the views of pupils. So I think that's a note to self there, that I will take the consultation to that group. I oversee that group with the Voice and Influence team and get a response from pupils on it. Yeah, that's a really good thing to do.
Is that quite a diverse group as well? Does that represent children from sort of different backgrounds, or is it how is that group comprised?
I'm not actually sure, because it was formed from the Voice and Influence team. I do know that they come from a range of schools and colleges. Their ages are from about 13 to 18. In terms of diverse social economic backgrounds, I'm not sure. They're diverse in terms of ethnicity and gender, so that there is some range of opinion.
Okay, thank you. So I think what I would suggest is, Angela, if it's okay, if we put this as an item again on the February meeting, just so we can have an update on where we've got to. It is very early in February. I think we're on the 3rd of February is our next meeting. And if there's anything that develops in the meantime, then we would get in touch with the board about that. And if necessary, we could convene a short notice working group if for some reason that did prove to be necessary. So is everybody happy with that? I'm seeing nods and no dissent. So, okay, right. Thank you. So we're moving on now to item 11, complete with a fanfare from somewhere, to the work schedule. So I will hand over to Angela to take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the usual report that presents the latest version of the board's work schedule for the remainder of the municipal year. The work schedule is set out in Appendix 1 of the report. Also referenced within the report is also a prompt for the board to discuss next steps relating to the board's ongoing inquiry into exclusions, elective home education and off-rolling. So as you know, last year, the board commenced this inquiry with the intention of this continuing into this municipal year, but as a result of the pandemic having a profound impact on the work of the Children and Families Directorate as well as local schools, the Scrutiny Board had agreed to temporarily pause the inquiry work, but to review the position again at today's meeting with a view to determining what a suitable time frame for resuming the inquiry would be. So the intention therefore through you, Chair, is to invite the views of the boards and also the representatives from the Directorate in that regard. Once the time frame's been agreed, this will obviously get reflected into the board's work schedule moving forward. So in addition to that, I guess it's any other further suggestions at this point, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So I'll invite people to make comments on that too. A couple of thoughts that I have is I wonder if perhaps given how rapidly things have changed again, if we're better off leaving it to the next municipal year to pick it up again. We do have space in March, but what I did wonder is, again, given where we've got to and when we started looking at this pandemic, I think everybody's instinct was we were looking at something that would last for 3 or 4 months and then gradually start to return to normal. I don't think anyone thought we'd be quite where we are, and the context for children and young people is very different. And one of the things that I've been interested in looking at, and I'll see what other people think, is actually what the long-term impact on children and young people is and what can be done about it. And I'd be quite interested to hear potentially from psychologists, potentially from somebody from the university, perhaps to talk us through what they see as the longer term impacts of the pandemic and what actions can be put in place to deal with those things. Because I think we've all got instinctive views on what the impacts are, but it's actually seeing some hard evidence So, and I wondered if perhaps the March meeting could focus a little bit on that. But I welcome anybody's views and comments on both that and also what we do with regard to the ongoing inquiry that we started. So I've got Councillor Renshaw with a hand up, and then I'll bring anybody else in that wants to chip in on this.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a good idea what you've just mentioned, but could we incorporate within that the youth services? Because if you remember before Christmas, we did discuss that briefly, and I think it would be useful to have them there the same time as all the psychologists, because it's young people with mental health issues that seem to be having the impacts, and they seem to be the ones struggling and taking lives. So I just think it'd be helpful to have the youth team in probably at the same time. That could be arranged.
Yep. Thank you for that. Val, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lamb. Just two things around that. One, around the exclusions data in elective home education. Absolutely, as you said, Councillor, the situation's changed completely because over the last year, because schools have been closed, we have not been able to either collate the same data, the picture has been completely different, schools not then going into fixed term exclusions because of the context, the situation, therefore looking for trends extremely difficult. The next set of data that comes out that follows the exec board report is in July 2019 for 1920. Because if we remember, all of the data is always lagged, that is for fixed term exclusions. So the exec board report that currently exists was for 1819. The next data that is available is in 1920. And as I say, that actually comparing it will be like apples and pears because of the different context that we are now in. So I think we need to consider that within the picture. Dramatically within the city. The latest figure for elective home education were at 835 young people who are being electively home educated. But again, we don't know whether that figure will drop dramatically once we see the return to schools and once the vaccination programme is in place. So again, pushing that on further into the year may be helpful to look at that. In terms of the suggestion that's around mental health, long-term effects, our educational psychology team have been working within the region and nationally, working with other psychology teams, working within children and family services to look at the best way we can support young people who have suffered anxiety, mental health issues. And we have also been working in Leeds in the Future in Mind programme about how we develop that trauma-informed practice and the interventions that we can put into place. So that is a whole piece of work that will be ongoing and that links into all of the Future in Mind work. Thank you, Councillor Lamb.
Okay. Thank you, Val. Councillor Forsyth, please.
I'll just keep this very short. It's just simply to flag up in the report where it talks about climate emergency, because we are also in a climate emergency. That when considering areas of work, the board is reminded that influencing climate change and sustainability should be a key area of focus. There's a lot more I could say. I just wanted to flag that up at the moment. The idea of having the discussion in March about the impact and thinking ahead, I think is a good one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Forsyth. Councillor Lennox, please.
Thank you. Just a comment. It was briefly, well, it was more than briefly mentioned earlier on about digital access and inclusion. This is not necessarily something that we need to put in the future agenda item, because hopefully we'll hear more about that soon, because homeschooling has already begun. But if perhaps the departments could come back to board members with information about how schools are managing access to laptops and devices. I think I said on the call for elected members the other day, it was only October that the government cut 80% of laptop access for schools. So it's going to be much more of a case of trying to find that access and that inclusion from maybe the third sector organisations that I know have sort of started to ramp up their what they're doing and turn it towards schools. So maybe it's just something that in the interim period, the department could update the board on what they're hearing from schools about this.
Okay, thank you for that. And then can I just check in with Sal, Councillor Venner and Councillor Pryor if they've got a view on what I proposed about our March meeting?
It sounds very positive to me, Chair. I just wanted to suggest the university research that I referred to earlier that I think would be a good contact. It's a piece of national research being done by Leeds on the impact of COVID on the early years sector. So it feels like they would be, you did mention the university, that the academics doing that piece of research may be helpful people to take part in the meeting.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Pryor or Sal?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Venner and the plan going forward.
Okay.
Yeah, happy with that, Councillor Lamb. I think, I mean, in February you will absolutely need updates, I think, as a board in terms of where we are at that moment in time. And I guess we'll be looking at what the plans are potentially for coming out of the current schools position. And given how live it is, by February you'll probably want to report on how things have gone over the next few weeks, and what the plans are for the weeks coming up. And I think the March idea is an excellent one.
Okay, thank you. So are there any dissenting voices on that plan, or is everybody happy to proceed as we've outlined there? Okay, well, thank you very much. If I can thank everybody for your contributions, and particularly for helping us to get through so much information ahead of schedule. So I'm really grateful for everybody cooperating with that. We've got through an enormous amount there. So the final item is the date and time of next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 3rd of February, starting at 10 AM, and as usual, a pre-meeting at 9:45 to sort out all of our technical hitches before we begin. So thank you very much, everybody, and see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all later.
Bye.